Okay, we're going to get into source water characteristics. And I get to finally use my interactive whiteboard. I've never had one of these before. It's been a lot of fun playing with it and getting this all ready to go. Need a pen?
There we go.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right. So, precipitation. Precipitation comes in the form of rain, snow, sleet, hail. What else we got there? Fog, mist. So the water cycle. What happens is we have rain clouds, storm clouds that build up over the oceans. They move over land. They precipitate in any one of these forms: rain, snow, sleet, hail, fog, mist. Falls down on the ground up in the mountains and moves into brooks and streams that become rivers that flow to lakes. Lakes and rivers is where we get our surface water. That's one of our source waters for water treatment. Okay. Another form of source water is our groundwater supply. Now, the cool thing about this picture is it shows these different layers right here in the sediments built up over, thousands or millions of years. And you can see there's different qualities of these layers. Some of them are more dense than others. So up in the mountains, and as the water percolates down through the mountains in the form of streams and rivers and lakes and such, water is finding its way below ground. And it finds this in the permeable material. Permeable allows water to pass through it. Now, it's a very slow process. It takes a lot of time, and that's good. That's good because water, when exposed to air and sunlight, grows algae. It's exposed to the flora and fauna that surrounds it, the animals, the environment, which contains bacteria, right? That's one big thing, bacteria. Another is, and that could be in the form of animal waste, dead animals, dead plants, and decaying plant matter affects water quality. So here in Arizona, we have, just outside of where we live here, we have several lakes that are each dammed up that hold back our water, and it's released very slowly so that we have water throughout the year down the Salt River. In the Salt River, we've all been there, I think. What's it like there? Well, the water's murky. It's full of algae. Doesn't smell too great sometimes. You have a lot of people that use that water for recreational purposes. In the lakes, they go water skiing, swimming, boating, fishing. In the rivers, it's tubing and picnicking and things like that. So you have, because of human interaction with our water supply or our watershed, you have vehicle fluids like oil and grease, antifreeze, radiator fluid, things like that spill onto the ground. Fuel, diesel, and regular gas, right? You have people's waste, the food they leave behind, the garbage they leave behind, the dirty diapers,
Napkins.
Yeah, all that garbage and trash and the stuff people leave behind, both in the water or next to the water, in the watershed. So when it rains and storms, that water that flows down picks up that material, takes it to the river. In the river itself, you have the flora and fauna of the river that just naturally live there: fish, insects, plants. All these things, just like us, they live their life and they die. Whilst they're living their life, they have an effect on the environment. They leave their waste behind. Algae does this. It's a plant. It's a single-celled plant. So it photosynthesizes, and during the day, that means it's taking in sunlight. It's taking in sunlight and converting that to an energy. So as it's growing, as it's living its life, it's taking that sunlight and releasing oxygen into the water. Well, at night, it respirates, meaning that at night, algae does the complete opposite. It takes the oxygen out of the water and replaces it with carbon dioxide. You mix carbon dioxide with water and you get a substance called carbonic acid. And acid, when entered into water, lowers the pH of the water. So during the day, as oxygen is being released into the water, either by algae or the action of wind across the water, water flowing, picking up air through the turbulence, through the day the pH tends to go up. In the mornings, overnight, the pH tends to go down because water is mixing with the carbon dioxide left by the algae that's in the water. So all these factors mean something. As water permeates through soil and rock, gravel, sand, stone, minerals, gas pockets, through the ground and through everything below our ground, it encounters impermeable material as well. Now, these layers of impermeable material, between them will have permeable material that will allow the water to flow down. Now, water is very heavy. It's one of the things that every operator should know is that water weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon. So up in the higher country and the higher elevations, as precipitation percolates down through the soil and the rock and sand and stone and such, it's moving down to lower elevations. So here in Arizona where we live, we're in a desert area. We're at a lower elevation than the mountains to the east and north of us, where the rain falls more than it does here down in the desert. So we all know that, right? Mm-hmm. So as the water percolates down through that material, it's moving very, very slowly, and it's moving to a lower elevation, meaning all the water above it is pressing down on the water below it, building up pressure. So every once in a while, you'll have a crack that'll appear in this impermeable material that'll allow water to escape out under pressure, right? We call that a spring. So water can make its way out. But once the water gets down here, where we are, we have groundwater. The groundwater table is a couple hundred feet below our feet. In some areas of the country, the water table is much closer to the surface. Some people can't even dig a swimming pool without floating their pool out because the water table is so close to the surface. But here in Arizona, where we're located, the groundwater is a couple hundred feet down, which is convenient for us because that means we can develop wells. We can develop wells to tap that water source. You know, the nearest river that we have available for source water is miles and miles and miles away. It would be very expensive to pull water off the Salt River or off the Verde River and pipe it all the way to us where we could treat it and then send it to our customers. It's much less expensive if we develop wells where we could tap the groundwater resources that we have to treat at a much less expensive cost and deliver it to our customers. We're going to save our customers money. And that's when a municipality where a water supplier is trying to figure out, hey, we don't have enough supply for the customers that we have, the area is growing, you know, what are we going to do? One of the first things they do is determine where's our nearest sources of water, treatable water. If we had minerals in our soil in this location that made it too expensive to treat the water to remove those minerals and gases, then we might think about going miles and miles away to a river to build intake structures, to pull the water in through pipes and bring it all the way out to us where we could treat the water and deliver it to our customers. We're very fortunate that the groundwater around here for years and years, for 100 years, there's been farmland all around us. And because of that, the worst characteristic of our water is the nitrates that are in our water. Now, it's not true in all of the water around us. That's why we've developed several wells over a very large area. Some of them have much better quality water than the wells that have nitrates in the water. Nitrates can be expensive to remove. One of the methods that we use to remove nitrates is an industrial size ion exchange process, basically a water softener. We use salts, we pass the water through the salts. Water in its natural state prefers sodium over other dissolved minerals. It prefers oxygen over other dissolved gases. That means if we run the water through sodium, the sodium will dissolve into the water and it forces out the other minerals that are in the water, including other salts like nitrates. And that makes the water softer. So we all know that when we take a shower and the water we're using is from a groundwater source, if we've done no other treatment, we're going to get that buildup of calcium around faucets and shower heads and things like that, any water appliance. That's because it's hard water. It's groundwater. Groundwater is hard water. We can treat hard groundwater with sodium, a water softener, and remove a lot of those minerals, and it is more pleasing to the customer because it doesn't build up that, you don't have that mineral buildup on your faucets and your shower heads, but you also have to use less soap because it takes less soap with soft water to bathe. It's more comfortable. You don't have that crusty feeling at the end. Soft water leaves the water easier or cleaner, makes us feel cleaner. Surface water is soft. It's soft water already because it doesn't have all the minerals that groundwater has. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. All right, so groundwater characteristics. So as I was saying, you have the storm clouds up in the mountains, it dumps rain, snow, other precipitation on the mountains. It builds up brooks and streams and lakes, rivers. And as that water moves down, it's moving through rivers and lakes down to lower elevations, but it's also moving through the ground. Now, in the first water plant I worked at years ago, we had a survey done, a geological survey done, and we knew that the groundwater was around 300 feet or so. The surface of the water table is about 300 feet down. I think it was 373 feet or 273 feet. But we also knew that the water was moving like a lake or like a river. If you could imagine in a lake, like say Saguaro Lake, we live nearby there, the water is moving from Canyon Lake past a dam being released into Saguaro Lake. The water moves from one side of the lake to the dam on the other side where it goes into the Salt River. So the water does flow through the lake. Through the groundwater table, our groundwater supply is constantly moving just like a river. Now there might be some caverns and things underground, but typically we're talking about sand, clay, gravel, stone. The water is moving through this material. And as it's moving through this material, where I first worked, it was about 3 miles every 10 years. 3 miles every 10 years. That's the way they wrote up the report. So every 10 years, the water would move about 3 miles. Yeah, pretty slowly. But that tells you that as the water is moving through this material, encountering rock and sand and stone and gravel, it's being filtered. Below ground, there's no bacteria. Bacteria has a hard time surviving below ground, right? So you don't have the flora and fauna interacting with groundwater. Groundwater tends to not have any turbidity or very little turbidity. However, what groundwater does encounter are pockets of minerals. They may be even radioactive. you've heard of uranium and other material that is mined in different parts of the country because it's radioactive. So the water might encounter radioactive pockets of minerals, calcium, magnesium, and other minerals that are in the water. It might also encounter pockets of natural gas, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and it picks those things up. It picks up those characteristics, right? So, and you combine all that and you get the characteristics of the water, surface water versus groundwater. Now, here's a diagram of a well. We have the motor up here. The well pumps water from below the water table. I got it. For whatever reason, the motion detectors aren't working in here, keeping the lights on, even though we're in here. So we're gonna have to get that looked at. And that's gonna stay on video because, hey, this is life, right? Mm-hmm. Things happen. So, besides, I don't think anybody would care if they couldn't see me. So, I wouldn't blame anybody. So what we have here is, here's the land surface or ground level. In this diagram, the water level is here of the aquifer of the groundwater supply. So if we don't do anything at all, the water level tends to stay static. Once we drop a well in there and we start pumping, when we activate the pump, it's just like pulling the drain in your bathroom sink. You see this vortex build up, right? So you see what we call in a developed well, the cone of depression. So imagine this is all sand and gravel. But within it, you have the water up to this level. You activate the pump and it starts to drain down. It's pulling water out of the aquifer, creating the cone of depression. And it gets to a point where as the pump is running, it gets down to the pumping level. And the pumping level, as long as we're not pumping too much water out, stays pretty much relative the same every time the pump is running. So we call this the cone of depression, and the difference between the static water level and the pumping level is the drawdown. That's the difference in the two levels, when the pump is on and the pump is off. The drawdown, that's important to understand. The radius of influence is the entire area that is affected by pumping the water out. Ideally, what we're doing here is we'll run the pump until we get the water that we need, and then we'll shut it off. Now, before a well is developed, they drill several pilots. They do an investigation to determine how much water can be pulled out of the groundwater supply without affecting the static water level when the pump is off. So ideally, when the pump goes off, the water level rises back up and gets to that static water level. So even though water moves very slowly through the ground, through this permeable and impermeable material, once you pump the water out, it wants to fill in the gap. So hopefully before this pump runs again, it has recovered and returned to its static water level. If we're not doing that, if we're running the pump more and we're drawing more water out than can be replaced, then we're over pumping. We're taking too much water. We have to be very, very careful as managers of our water system not to do that. If we do it and we continue doing it over time, we'll have problems just like we've seen in other parts of the country and the world where they've over pumped their groundwater supply, which leads to subsidence. Subsidence is a condition where the ground starts to fall.
Sinkholes.
Sinkholes, very good. Okay, so let's talk about surface water characteristics. As I said, the surface waters are open to the flora and fauna of the environment and everything that the flora and fauna, how it affects that water. So we have taste and odor problems. Taste and odor problems are the biggest customer complaints that we encounter in a water utility. If your water doesn't taste or smell right, you're going to hear from it from your customers. which leads me to the responsibility of a water treatment plant operator, a water distribution system operator, even operators on the wastewater treatment and collection side. Our first duty as a certified operator is to protect the health and safety of the customer. And that means, in this case, when we're talking about water treatment, water distribution, is to provide water that is aesthetically pleasing. It's safe to drink, number one, but it's aesthetically pleasing. That means it has a pleasant taste and odor. That includes temperature. We're gonna go into that in a moment. Surface water tends to have taste and odor problems, and that's due to algae, primarily. Algae, and there's many types of algae, and some of them are just kind of grassy, right? They taste or smell grassy, makes the water taste or smell grassy. Some algae is just terrible. It smells like a pig pen. It has an algae, as it dies off, it can go septic. And when it goes septic, you get those rotten egg odors of hydrogen sulfide, right? So you have algae, bacteria, fungi, all these things in the water that can affect taste and odors. As a water treatment plant operator, you need to get those things out of the water. And there's various methods of doing that, various treatment processes to remove the harmful substances that are in the water, but also the substances that affect taste and odor. So let's talk about the profundal zone of a lake. You have a lake or a large body of water that's deep. When you get to the profundal zone, this is the zone where the sunlight doesn't penetrate down to it. It's dark, it's cold. The flora and fauna of the lake tend to be very rare down at these levels. Everything in the top layers of the water is where you're gonna find the fish, where you're gonna find plants, algae, anything that needs sunlight. When you get down to these lower layers where the sunlight doesn't reach, it's everything that has been alive at the top that has fallen down to the bottom and is being eaten up by anaerobic bacteria. So we're going to talk about anaerobic bacteria. Okay, so the anaerobic bacteria, it's bacteria that it breaks down these solids really well down at the bottom. You know, you ever stepped in mud and you find that black layer of mud and it stinks terribly?
Yeah.
That's anaerobic material there. That's populated by anaerobic bacteria. And anaerobic bacteria are great because they break down those things that are dead and decaying. They break it down really well and make it available. They make those nutrients available to other organisms in the environment. Plants. You know, it's fertilizer for plants. Someday, as it breaks down at the bottom, it's going to make its way to a place where plants can use it again. So, anaerobic bacteria give off hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, methane. And that matter, if it's caught up in the intake structure that leads to a water treatment plant, can cause taste and odor problems as well. Ground storage tanks. What you see here in the background is a ground storage tank. What we're used to seeing out here are these ground storage tanks. They're large cylinders, and they come in various sizes. I think we have one out here that's about 30 feet in diameter, but then we have another one right next to it that's about 45 or 50 feet in diameter. We tend to have ours around 22 to 25 feet in height. We don't really want to get much higher than that just because this is a bedroom community. We don't want very large structures that people have to look at. We keep them a little bit lower. It's less of an eyesore. So they're sized according to several factors. One is to meet peak demand. So what's peak demand? Well, if we deliver 1 million gallons a day to our customers And that's and we know it's 1 million gallons a day. What we do is we divide that by how many minutes are in a day to get how many gallons per minute that we're delivering to our customers on average through a 24-hour period. Well, through that 24-hour period, the water's just not being used at a constant rate. It varies. Just as like I was saying, this is a bedroom community, right? A lot of people live here and then commute miles and miles away to other cities where their jobs are. To do that, they got to get up early in the morning. 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, they're getting up. They're using the bathroom. They're showering. They're cooking their breakfast. They're using water. They're using a lot more water than they used overnight while they were sleeping, right? So overnight, we have an off-peak period. Most people are asleep, so water is hardly being used. In the early morning hours, as people awaken and get ready for their day, get their kids ready for school and get ready to go to work, they're using water. That means they're pulling water out of our distribution system and sending it down the drain into the collection system. So we have a peak period that starts about 5 a.m. and extends generally till about 10 a.m. Well, once everybody's gone off to work and school, water usage drops. It's not as low as it was overnight because there's still people awake. There's still people working at the dentist's office, at the grocery store, at the restaurants, and they're still using water. So the morning peak, 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. drops off, it passes. When we get into 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., peak demand comes up again. People are coming home from school and work. They're doing their laundry, they're cooking dinner, maybe taking showers, they're doing whatever they're doing, but it's using water. So we have 2 cycles per day of peak demand, generally between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m., 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. Okay, so what do we mean by peak demand? Well, what we can say is if you take the amount of water you deliver to the customer over a 24-hour period, divide that by the minutes in a day, 1,440.
Yep, 1440.
Then you'll get your average demand in gallons per minute. If you take that number and multiply it by 2.5, you should get what you expect your peak demand to be in gallons per minute. What that means is peak demand is about 2.5 times the daily average. That's what all that means. During peak, the amount of water being used is 2.5 times your average over a 24-hour period. That's important to know because if your booster pumps keep kicking on, and we're going to learn about booster pumps here in another video, we have booster pumps that send the water out to the customer and keep the system pressurized. And if they keep kicking on and running continuously, then maybe your system isn't designed to have the capacity required to supply water to your customers. Maybe you need to build another ground storage tank. Maybe you need to develop another well. Maybe you need another booster pump station to take the water from that new ground storage tank that's getting water from the newly developed well to send out to your customers. It's important because we need fire flow. Fire flow, if you can imagine, we're in a peak period. Maybe we've just gotten into a peak period and there's a fire, maybe a large fire, and the firefighters need water to fight that fire. We have to be able to provide enough water for our customers that they don't notice an interruption in service, as well as have the capacity, the water stored, that will allow the firefighters to fight these fires and use a lot of water to do it. So there's several considerations when determining how much water we need to provide our customers at peak demand and in fire flow situations. Booster pumps. We were just talking about booster pumps here for a moment. So right here behind you, you see a ground storage tank. Ground storage tank, our wells keep that ground storage tank at a certain level. in utilities where they're using surface water. They pull that water out of lakes and rivers. They take it to a water treatment plant. The water treatment plant treats the water and puts it in a ground storage tank. Nearby, you're going to have booster pump station. The booster pump station is the point where it pulls water from the ground storage tank and pushes it into the distribution system, which sends the water to our customers. We call this point the EPDS, the entry point to the distribution system. It's important to understand that this is a point where the water treatment ends, water treatment and storage, it ends, and it's the beginning of the distribution system. In the department we work in, this is ours. At this point, to the customer, we're conveyance. We manage and maintain the distribution system. But the EPDS is also a location where we take our daily samples to sample the water that's going out to the customer. Samples are taken every day throughout our distribution system, even to the end, the furthest point of the distribution system, right? We're constantly pulling samples and testing those samples to ensure that the water we're sending to our customers is safe, because that's our number one responsibility, to protect the health and safety of the public. We constantly monitor the quality of the water to make sure, depending on the samples and what we're doing, we want to assure ourselves that the water is safe for the customers. So in this booster pump station, you have a ground storage tank, has a certain amount of water in it. We want to maintain a certain level of water, and maybe in this tank, and this is just an estimated guess, maybe the lowest point we want to get is 5 feet, 6 feet. And the reason why is because we want to maintain what we call positive suction head to these pumps. What you see here is a motor. And what you see right here is a pump. It's a centrifugal pump. Because of the type of pump it is, the volute, the pump itself where the impeller is, needs to stay primed, full of water. So to do that, we have a pipe that comes out of the ground storage tank and comes along and pushes water to every pump. Pushes water to every pump, and it keeps, just by gravity alone, it keeps the volutes of all these pumps primed. So why is that important?
What did you only write cone under pressure?
For these pumps to work the way they're supposed to, the volutes need to be primed with water. If we don't keep these volutes primed with water and air gets in, it could start cavitating. Cavitation is when water becomes a vapor, it boils, takes the air out of the water, and you have microscopic bubbles of air, countless billions of them, that form and explode in thousandths of a second. It's just like the craziest machine gun you've probably ever heard. Just pop, 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 pop. And every time these microscopic bubbles of air explode, it causes damage to the impeller of the pump. Components of pumps are generally very, very expensive. So we don't want that to happen. So we want to make sure that the water is staying above a certain level. In off-peak hours, we want to make sure that we're filling up those tanks. We don't want to have too much storage because we worry about water age. Water is fresh for a certain period of time after treatment, after we pulled it out of the ground and treated it, after we've taken it from the rivers and lakes and treated it. The water is fresh for a brief period of time, generally about 24 hours or so. We want enough storage capacity to be able to deliver water to our customers even during peaks, even during fire events, but not so much water that we're holding it for 2-3 days at a time, allowing it to go stale. The longer water sits around, the more the dissolved oxygen in the water leaves, precipitates out, It off-gasses that oxygen and the water grows stale. And over time, it's gonna taste flat. You ever picked up a glass of water that's been sitting on the counter for a couple of days just because because it was convenient, and you take a drink and you're like, that doesn't taste right? It's not as fresh as it was when it came out of the faucet. And by the way, just so you can see here, and we're gonna talk about this a lot in a different video, but the water is being fed through this pipe. It comes out of the ground storage tank, goes up to this pipe. It feeds those pumps, keeps them primed. When the pumps are pumping, they're kicking it up at a 90-degree angle into the distribution system. That's where 90's down here, goes underground into the distribution system out to the customer. The high point up here is where the ARV is, the air relief valve. We want to keep air out of there. If air is in the pipe, you can compress air, but it's still taking up room. If you have air in your pipes, it reduces the volume of the pipe, so you don't have as much water available. We'll go into that later. Water distribution system. So here we show a lake, a dam. You have raw water mains that pull raw water out of this lake. It goes to a water treatment plant. The water treatment plant sends the water out. It might send it to a ground storage tank, but eventually it goes out into distribution and transmission mains. Those distribution and transmission mains take the waters out to the customers. It could be large companies, industrial, it could be just regular neighborhoods. So you have large pipes that bring the water to the plant, pipes that are almost as large or about as large that take it out along transmission and distribution mains. And as it gets out to the customer, the pipe becomes smaller and smaller in diameter. But eventually, you take it to neighborhoods. You have the distribution mains that run down the streets, that go to service connections, service lines that take it to the meter at the customer's home. Typically, and out here, this is where we work, our responsibility stops at the meter. Anything after the meter belongs to the customer. Okay, so we basically deliver water to meters. The water meters are the cash register for the utility. They're constantly measuring how much water is flowing through them. They're generally very reliable. When they begin to fail, they're designed to fail in the customer's benefit. So if we know that these meters last, let's say 10 years, and we wait 15 years to replace them, we are losing money. Not only are we losing money, but we don't have an accurate count for the amount of water we deliver to our customers. And that's very important because in our utility, we're pulling groundwater. We have to pay a government agency for every 1,000 gallons of water that we pull from the ground. We have to pay a price for that. And then we have to treat that water and convey it to our customers. And there's a rate that has been set by a government agency that we can charge the customer. The more accurate we are, the more efficient we are. The more efficient we are, the less cost there is to maintain and develop these systems. Okay, going to the study guide, source water characteristics, question number 1. The first responsibility of a water distribution system operator is to provide
Safe drinking water.
safe drinking water. Safe.
And that's
First responsibility.
first one, yeah.
First one is safe.
Safe. Aesthetically pleasing.
The way I like to put it, and I've written it on the board, Brian, it's been in our office for quite a while. The first responsibility of an operator
Health and safety.
is to protect the health and safety of the customer.
Yeah.
The customer includes anybody that's even just driving through the system that stops at a fast food place and gets a Coke. They're making that Coke, that soda with our water.
So we got D. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Number 2, anything in the water which is too small and light to settle out. And by the way, the students here in the room have homework that they've Well, because this is brand new, the homework is brand new, they didn't really get a lot of time to study it, but in the future, I'd expect that anybody taking this course, watching the videos, when they get those PDFs of the study guides, they'll be able to read that material. You can Google it, you can look it up, do your own studies, answer the questions, and then watch the video. And if you've done all that, then you're gonna know that the answer is C, colloids. Colloids are finely divided particles, typically clay. They're so small they don't have weight. And in water treatment, particles in the water that don't have weight are costly to treat. We need to get those particles out because the water needs to be aesthetically pleasing, but also it has to be safe. To make sure the water is safe, we have to take those colloids out. Why is that? The reason why is because those colloids can interfere in the disinfection process. Once we've treated the water, that includes taking out all the heavy stuff that's in the water. We filter the water, and anything that's left in the water is going to shade or protect harmful bacteria from disinfection. And that's what we don't want. If colloids remain in the water and we try to disinfect it, harmful pathogenic organisms may survive the disinfection process, and now we're not protecting the health and safety of our public, of our customers. Number 3, color in water caused by organics. When it's caused by organics, that means this is surface water. Surface water, when it's sitting on the ground, when it's in lakes and rivers and streams, it has dead, decaying vegetation. So tannic acid from leaves that are decaying can leach into the water and cause color, brown or green colors. We call this true color. True color, C, is the correct answer. It comes from organics that are in the water. Number 4, this is found in surface waters and may lead to taste and odors, shortened filter runs, fluctuations in pH, and greatly affects the amount of DO in the water.
Alkalinity. C.
You're saying C, alkalinity?
I'm saying D.
Algae. It's algae.
Because
Algae.
plant life, right?
Algae, if you're lucky, is just tasting grassy or smelling grassy. But a lot of algae smells like hydrogen sulfide. It's nasty, fishy.
The rotten egg thing.
Rotten eggs from hydrogen sulfide. Shortened filter runs, it clogs up the filters. Fluctuations in pH, like we were talking about earlier. Algae during the day, it's putting dissolved oxygen in the water, which raises the pH. At night, it's respirating, it's pulling oxygen out of the water and releasing carbon dioxide. Just like we do when we respirate, we breathe in oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide. You mix carbon dioxide and H2O, you get carbonic acid. It's an acid, it lowers the pH. Makes it very difficult to treat the water. So it's affecting the DO in the water, the dissolved oxygen in the water. Number 5, NTUs are a measure of turbidity. NTU stands for nephelometric turbidity unit. Nephelometric. I'm new to using this Samsung interactive whiteboard. And I like it a lot more than using a regular whiteboard. There's less glare because this has kind of got a matte finish.
Yeah.
But it's weird writing on it. It takes like twice as long to write something.
Oh, okay.
It's weird.
Like I said,
Nephelometric.
nephelometric. Okay.
Yeah, an NTU. NTU You can call it an NTU meter.
Probably easier to
It
say.
stands for nephelometric turbidity units. Number 6, disinfection chemicals. Chlorine, for example, are most effective at this temperature.
That'd be at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, right?
68 degrees Fahrenheit. Ooh. Weird. Usually that right somewhere. Nope, strange. C, 60, or D, 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
Why is it 68?
You know, a lot of chemicals have developed to work at that temperature.
Mhm.
And it's not just in our industry, it's in multiple industries. When I love photography. And back when 100 years ago when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, because I'm super old, one of our employees even calls me elderly. I'm 55 years old. My cardiologist, and I have one now because I'm old, says that elderly doesn't occur until about 72.
Yeah. Keep believing that.
Doesn't stop. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Brian, young man with a weird beard. So in photography, all the chemicals that you use to develop film and photos, the ideal temperature was 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So you kept the dark rooms where all the chemicals are stored at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But it tends to be where manufacturers design these chemicals to work best at, generally. I can't speak to all of them. Number 7, the MCL of turbidity according to the SDWA. Well, let's talk about, before we answer the question, let's talk about the MCL. The MCL is maximum contaminant level. So the federal government formed the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And then a few years later, excuse me, they passed the Safe Drinking Water Act. The Safe Drinking Water Act, the SDWA, gave power and authority to the EPA to develop these regulations and laws to protect the potable water supply. You know, it's very, very common back before these laws were put in place for the water supply to cause a lot of diseases. And that killed people off, made people sick. So it's because of these laws that we have standards that we have to meet as water treatment plant operators, as water distribution system operators. We got to provide water that meets a certain level of quality before we can send it to our customers. And that's one reason why we sample our water every day at multiple locations, is so that we can ensure that water is safe to drink, that we're meeting these standards that were set by the SDWA, the Safe Drinking Water Act. In Arizona, the primacy agency for water regulation is the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. Every state has an office or an agency, a state agency, similar to Arizona's Department of Environmental Quality. They act on behalf of the federal government to enforce these laws. And a state certainly has the right to create their own laws as long as the federal standard is met.
What was the
What was the answer to that? The MCL of turbidity according to the SDWA is D, and I need to fix that. 0.3 NTU in 95% of the samples with a 1 NTU maximum. So in a water treatment plant, a surface water treatment plant typically, we have a meter that's constantly going. It's constantly pulling samples and testing the treated water, looking for turbidity. And if it exceeds 1 NTU, it's automatic. There's a violation. There's something wrong. The important part here is that the water treatment plant operator is paying attention, that they're getting the alert, they're getting the alarm, they're getting the notification that, hey, something's wrong, filters are bound up, there's some issue going on, you just exceeded 1 NTU. Hopefully they get that alarm before it's exceeded, they can do something before that happens.
to prevent it?
And a good water treatment plant operator is constantly monitoring his plant, constantly watching the quality of the water coming in. If there's a storm going on 5 miles away and that water is on its way to them, they will get a heads up. If they're paying attention, if they're doing their job, they're gonna know that they have water quality coming in that's gonna be less than what there might be under normal circumstances, right? So one of my best friends is a water treatment plant operator. He's the supervisor of one over in one of the municipalities. And they pull their water off of what we call the CAP, the Central Arizona Project, water that comes from the Colorado River. And it flows through channels and canals and makes its way all the way down to the valley. And he pulls that water, his plant pulls that water off of the CAP. If there's a storm event, then they know that poor water quality is on its way, and they can take steps to to protect the plant from poor water quality that is coming in. Number 8, dissolved minerals and dissolved gases are characteristics most affecting.
Would that be surface?
No groundwater.
Groundwater. Dissolved minerals, dissolved gases is typically found in groundwater.
Your organics would be your surface, right?
Yep.
Okay.
You said inorganics?
No organics.
Red stains on clothes and plumbing fixtures is most likely caused by
Red stain, that would be iron.
iron, B, and that's groundwater.
Groundwater.
Yep. The capacity of water to neutralize acids. Adrian?
Alkalinity.
Alkalinity, there you go. Alkalinity is the capacity to neutralize acids. It's what, if we add alkalinity to water, we can raise the pH. So that just leads to something real quick. Let's talk about pH. What is pH? pH is on a scale from 0 to 14. Right in the middle, a pH of 7 is neutral. From 0 to 7, we have acidic. And from 7 to 14, is alkaline. Treating water. If our source water is at 7, that's perfect. It's the best water to treat, least expensive on a pH scale. The more acidic it is, the more alkaline we have to add to the water so that we can adequately treat the water, depending on the treatment process. You know, it depends on the treatment process, but there are times when we do want acidic water, there are times when we do want alkaline water, but it takes adding chemicals to change the pH. So the less we have to do that, the more efficient we are. We never ever, part of being efficient is not adding too much chemical or not adding enough chemical. And to be efficient, the best water to have is neutral, a neutral pH of 7. Watch this. Isn't that cool?
That was cool too.
Yeah, it's all tricky. Then I ruin it by dropping my stylus. Number 11, when high levels of calcium and magnesium salts are in the water, we call this
Hardness.
hardness. Again, this is groundwater that has dissolved minerals. The other day we were working on this class, on this study guide, and we had an emergency call. We had to leave. So we're picking it back up again. We're starting with question number 12. I haven't gone back and not quite sure on the video that we do have. I think we stopped at 11. So we're picking it up at 12. So the DO level in water will be at this level during an algal bloom.
Super saturated.
Super saturated during the day. So remember, algae during the day is taking sunlight, converting that energy. It's photosynthesizing, converting the energy to produce its food. during the day, it's expelling or exhaling oxygen, it's letting out oxygen. At night, it's pulling oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide mixes with the water and produces carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is an acid, it lowers the pH. If you remember the scale I had written up here, 0 to 14, 7 is neutral, 0 to 7 is on the acidic side, 7 to 14 is the alkaline side. So we would say on this side of the scale, it's more acid or acidic. On this side, it would be more alkaline or basic. Okay. 13. The swimming pool smell of water is likely caused by the disinfection byproduct
Dichloramine.
dichloramine. Dichloramine, it's a chloramine, it's what happens when chlorine mixes with ammonia. So if you have any trace amounts of ammonia in the water that you've treated, chloramine is gonna take that ammonia, and before it can break it down, it will combine with it and form chloramines. You have trichloramine, dichloramine, forget what the first one is. Chloramine. I'm drawing a blank on that, but that's not important right now. Dichloramine is known for having that swimming pool odor of water, you know, that chlorine smell.
Now, is that only because it's attached to ammonias, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there might be some other organics in the water that might have the same effect that chlorine will attach to. And that's the thing, the chlorine will combine with it first. And that's how chlorine attacks these pathogenic organisms, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, ammonia, chemicals that are in the water, gases and minerals. It tries to attach itself to that first to try, and then as more chlorine is added or more chlorine comes into contact with that, it slowly destroys it.
Yeah.
So if we have dichloramines in the water, for example, monochloramine, that's what it is. Mono, di, tri. Monochloramines, dichloramines, trichloramines. So what happens is more and more chlorine comes into contact in contact with these chloramines until they're destroyed. Once they're destroyed, we hit what's called a break point, and then you have a free chlorine residual you can measure in the water. But in this case, as this dichloramine, it really gives off that chlorine smell. Now, keep in mind that, so we often use buckets of calcium hypochlorite. That's the powdered form of chlorine. It's 65 to 70% chlorine, and it's in a powder. It's a white powder, which helps me remember it's called calcium hypochlorite. Calcium, we associate that with bones. Bones we associate with being white. So calcium hypochlorite is a white powder. It's 65 to 70% chlorine, which is a lot of chlorine. They come in these buckets, either 3 gallons or 5 gallon buckets. And what do we train our staff to do? If they're gonna open that bucket,
Walk away.
you figure out which way the wind is blowing. And if the wind is blowing this way, and you open the lid to that bucket, number one, you don't want your face being close to that. Number two, you don't want to be downwind of it, you want to be upwind. So if I have a bucket of calcium hypochlorite, any empty space in that bucket is going to be pure chlorine gas. Chlorine gas is 100% chlorine.
It's bad.
Even a little bit can knock you on your butt, right? So if I'm going to open that bucket and the wind's coming at me this way, I'll reach down, because it screws a little bit. It's got at least the buckets that we use. I'll loosen it up, but I won't lift up the lid yet. I'll loosen the lid, and as I go to pick up the lid, I'll make sure nobody is downwind that's going to be affected by this, and I'll walk upwind as I'm peeling up the lid to the bucket. That way I don't have to inhale any of that chlorine. You get that strong chlorine smell. Now when it's in our water like this, and this is a major complaint from customers, is that once in a while you'll get a call from a customer that says, hey, I went to I started my faucet to get some water to cook with, and it smells like chlorine. You're putting too much chlorine into the water, you got to turn it down. See, now that makes sense. If it smells like chlorine, there's probably too much chlorine in the water. But as operators, we know that, and our water treatment plant operators know this. It's important for our distribution operators to know this because we're the ones that fill the complaints, right? Is that often means that there's not enough chlorine in the water. So what's happening is that customer probably lives near a dead end on a distribution system. We have loop systems and we have tree systems, or branched. And at the end of those systems, those branched ends, or those tree ends, it's usually the only thing at the end of that water line is a fire hydrant. Well, it means that the water is being pushed into that line, it's coming to a dead end, and over time, water ages. The dissolved oxygen of the water that keeps the water fresh is depleted. The water tends to get septic. It'll turn black. It'll stink just like the worst things that get found in the sewers. But the customer at the end of the line doesn't notice it until it starts to make its way. The water worsens and worsens till it gets to that service, and they start getting little bits and pieces of it. Now what's happening is, as that's getting closer to the customer, to the fresher water, where the fresh water reaches the old water, the chlorine that's in the water is mixing with the ammonia and the septic conditions that are in that water, and is creating these dichloramines. So our customers need to know, or what they don't understand, and what we need to know is that when the customers are complaining of that, first of all, we should go out there and flush the system. We flush the system, get that old water out of there, get all that nasty stuff out, and then start pulling residuals. Let's make sure that we have the residual that we want. And if we don't, we might have to turn up the chlorine just a little bit just to get rid of the dichloramines. Okay. Number 14, carbon dioxide mixes with water to form carbonic acid, which
Lowers the pH.
lowers the pH. Number 15, turbidity is a physical characteristic of water which can be found in groundwater and surface water, but is by far more of a concern in
Groundwater.
Surface water.
it's going to be surface water, because remember, surface water is affected by the flora and fauna, the environment, storm events, things like that. Surface water is much more turbid. Have you been to the Salt River up here?
Yeah.
So you know how cloudy, how green that water is. That's turbidity. If you can't see through the water, it's because there's stuff in the water that won't allow you to see through it. And that stuff in the water is typically turbidity. It's algae. It's colloids. And colloids are very, very small, finely divided particles of clay that almost have no weight, so they don't settle out. Okay. So, surface water.
Surface.
That's our biggest concern. Number 16, true color is caused by blank and found in blank. True color.
That'll be under organics. And I want to say surface for true. True color.
True color is caused by organics and found in surface water,
Surface
B.
Yeah.
Right? So that is the plant matter, vegetation,
Algae growth.
Yep.
Everything.
so
like that.
tannins or tannic acid, I believe it's called, that leach out of leaves and
Yeah.
decaying vegetation. So that's true color. What about apparent color? Apparent color is caused by blank and found in blank.
Wouldn't that be your organic or inorganics?
Mhm.
And if we just did surface, it'll be groundwater.
Right,
Or-
so inorganics, which is dissolved minerals and gases found in groundwater,
Yeah.
right? Very good. Number 18. Most people find the ideal temperature of water to be
D.
50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's so funny. I bet you the mic on there can pick that up.
No.
Oh, definitely.
No.
Number 19, what test is used to measure tastes?
D, there is no measure.
There is no test to measure taste. Brian's beard is absolute.
Oh, you didn't even quit it.
Number 20, odor from algae is a concern in water treatment plants which treat surface water. You don't find algae in groundwater. 21, water from this source usually contains more dissolved minerals.
Minerals are in the ground, groundwater.
Groundwater, A. 22, this source water is generally much higher in pathogenic organisms, Jedi.
It's gonna be surface water.
Surface water, B. Number 23, the physical characteristics of water include taste and odor, yes or no?
Yes,
Temperature,
absolutely.
turbidity and color,
Always get it.
so it's D, all the above. Number 24, algal blooms are the primary cause of taste and odors in waters from this source.
It's surface water.
Surface water. Same question over and over again, but worded differently, right?
Yeah, just like on your test. It'll be worded different.
Yeah, just like on your exams. Colloids will generally be a problem in water treatment plants which use this source water.
Colloid will be your ground, right? No, surface.
Surface water.
Surface water.
Surface water. I mean, you can find them in groundwater, but generally.
Yeah, generally it'll be your surface. Your most common, right?
Number 26, hard water is a characteristic of, is it true color, iron, manganese, or copper? And we're talking hard water.
Or would that be iron? No, manganese.
What makes, yeah, very good, C, manganese. And what makes water hard is the dissolved minerals in the water, primarily the calcium, the manganese.
Yep.
Okay.
That's that buildup on the faucet.
Yep. And that's it. We finally finished this after how many days?
Yeah.
An emergency call and changing our clothes. Well, I did. Ryan doesn't usually.
Hey, man. No. The wise guy.
All right, thank you.
How long was that?